I earned a bachelor's in hospitality management. I managed a restaurant for a while and enjoyed helping others, but I wanted a different way to serve. Then I discovered the Felician Way and enrolled in Felician University's Accelerated Nursing Program. Felician ABSN is offered in 2 accelerated formats, a hybrid program in Parsippany and an on-ground program in Rutherford. Plus, Felician University provides a values-based education, which is important to me. Discover the Felician Way. Search Felician ABSN.
This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/into the portal.
1200 BCE. It was the high point of the Shang dynasty, in a time when tales of great exploration and mystery of the Bronze Age were being formed into the mythologies of ancient China. Stories that some claim to be very, very real. There was one such tale of a skillful magician, an alchemist, and a great thinker known only as Li. His identity has been obscured by the lost pages of Chinese history. However, his story is not one easily forgotten. Beyond magic and alchemy, exploration was indeed another of his exploits, and after disappearing for decades, Li returned and presented to the Shang Emperor a tale of great discovery. He had set out into the abyss of the sea, traversing waters never before seen, and after years of navigation and survival, he reached a new world. A place of massive mountain ranges and mighty rivers, a landscape of great abundance, and he spoke of a place where the people had conquered these landscapes. He had made contact that none had before. The emperor was told of a great people who had been granted an elixir of life by their god, but they would not allow Li to return home with such a potion. They demanded 1,000 noblemen, beautiful women, and skilled craftsmen in exchange for such knowledge. Enthralled with the story, the Shang Emperor himself, along with Li, commanded a fleet to venture back to this newfound world. However, they would never again return to China, disappearing. Whether real or not, great myths such as this will always have their place in a very real version of history. And when it comes to ancient explorers, the stories that surface will always fuel a search for new truths, for things yet discovered. Join us on Into the Portal as we discuss myths and legends of great explorations, the possibilities of pre-Columbian contact, and investigate the history of ancient Chinese explorers.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Here we are.
It is Saturday morning.
Saturday, I know. We wanted to record on Friday the 13th.
We did, but...
And then we ended up drinking instead.
Well, yeah. I had a glass of rosé, and then a glass turned into a bottle.
So we decided it would probably be best to do it in the morning. We're both a little tired. But we're feeling pretty good, though.
We're doing good.
So here we are. I think we're episode 21 we're on here now.
Yeah.
Which is pretty sweet.
Holy moly.
I know, right?
That's
Time's
crazy.
just flying by.
It really is.
And we're talking about some really cool kind of ancient Chinese explorers stuff today. But before we get into the episode, we have a little bit of housekeeping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd like to say just thank you so much. We've got a couple new Patreon members, and we're super excited.
Yep.
So thank you, Dylan Crema, and to Laura Anderson for pledging your support.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
It seriously means the world to us. Like, you don't even know, like, our heart swells when we see that. We're just like,
Seriously.
oh my gosh. Yeah, it was. Oh.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and we'll be sending out stickers and things coming up soon, and yeah, we're really stoked about that. So thank you, and yeah, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/into the portal. Check out what we have to offer.
Yeah, we just put up our King John's Crown Jewels as our first mini-sode.
Yeah.
You can unlock that at the $5 level.
It's funny too. It's like we call it a mini-sode, but I think it ended up being about 45 minutes.
It was at least 45. Yeah,
so it's
almost
not,
50.
That's Into the Portal's version of a mini-sode. We also have some new iTunes reviews.
Yeah.
Which is pretty sweet.
We do.
Yeah.
Holy crap. I was actually really... I was really shocked, actually, because we had a whole slew of new ones.
Yeah.
So we're going to go tag team this, go one by one. Starting with Vinyl Beard. He gives us a 5-star review. Says, Journey into Mystery. Into the Portal provides a lighthearted but thorough look into the unknown. From the Flatwoods Monster to Ogopogo, this podcast transports you to a weird world that challenges your imagination.
Nice.
Love that.
I like that. Thanks, man. Yeah, that's
thank
great.
you.
Vinyl Beard.
Vinyl Beard.
Yeah, we got another one from Little Mort 37. It's titled Bingeable, 5 stars. So my sister and I have been binging on this show for weeks. Andrew and Amber make an awesome team, and Amber's laugh is just the best. I super heart this show.
Aw, thanks,
Thank
little
you.
Mort. You know what's funny? I actually thought that said Bingable. I thought she was like listening to it on Bing or something. You know, like that.
Yeah. Like
But no, that makes way more
doesn't-
sense.
yeah.
It's bingeable.
That
Duh,
makes- yeah,
obviously. Yeah, still half asleep, I guess.
It's all good.
Then we had another one from Unseen Dix. If I'm saying that wrong, I am so sorry. It's DE and then X.
Capital X, yeah.
He says here, great listen and great stories. 5 stars. The casual commentary between Andrew and Amber provides the feeling of being part of the conversation yourself. It's awesome to see their passion be shown through these stories, as well as their honesty and perspective when it comes to the research. If you're looking for some wild superstition and fun speculation, this is your podcast. Oh,
Nice.
thanks, bud.
Sweet. These are really good, man. Like, these are really positive.
Really positive, I know. Oh,
So we got a couple more. So great new show by Free Thoughts. I've been listening to these two for about a month now, and I love their variety of awesome topics and how in-depth they go. They put the time into resting great and mind engaging content. Oh my goodness, there's a few typos in that one, I think. But download, you will not be disappointed. 5-star review from Free Thoughts. Oh my goodness.
You can't talk right now.
I can't talk today.
No.
What's going on here, people?
No.
Goodness me. You picked this up from...
Well, we got one more to cover here. It's from El Sergio. He gives us another 5 stars. He says, amazing quality, personable host. As a podcaster of nearly 8 years, I am jealous of the high quality production the show has for being so young. The hosts have a great chemistry both together and individually, and you can tell they really enjoy the topics they discuss. My girlfriend says... I like her voice. Is she pretty? Which I assume is also a compliment of some sort. You guys keep up the great work. I'll always be eagerly waiting the next episode.
Nice.
That's awesome. Thank you.
The funniest thing about all these comments about your voice is the fact that you always say how much you hate your voice.
I hate my voice
and now
so
you're getting all
much.
these compliments about it. Your laugh and stuff. It's pretty awesome.
I just, yeah.
It's so funny.
I don't get it.
I love it.
But it's all good.
So yeah, thank you so much for the reviews, guys, and
Yeah.
keep them coming. Like, we really appreciate it. We'll always read them out and shout you out on the show for sure. One last thing before we get going, we have an upcoming special series that we wanted to just kind of give a little teaser for. Do you want to talk about that for a sec?
Well, yeah, it's kind of been in the works for a while now, and we're really excited. It's actually with one of our fellow Podfix family podcast members. So, yeah, we're doing a series called Historical Hypocrites, Madmen, and Megalomaniacs with Fan Film Boys. So, yeah, I think we're recording the first of the series this week.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure when it's actually going to be released, but we're really excited about it.
Yeah, so head over to podfixnetwork.com. You can check out those guys. We're there as well, and other great shows. And yeah, stay tuned for that. It's going to be really fun.
Totally.
All right, let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
So,
I feel like it's the lights coming down at, like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
yeah, set the stage. Hey, it's a podcast, but yeah, if people can envision that, yeah, it's cool. We are... Okay, so first of all, we put out a call last week, and the week a little bit earlier in the week before, to get ideas for episodes. And this was an idea that actually came from one of our new Patreon members, Dylan. And a lot of you came at us with really great ideas, and we're banking them. There were some great UFO abduction suggestions, some
like disappeared people.
Yeah, disappeared missing persons and stuff. Really cool ideas in the Facebook group.
Some cryptid creatures and things?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool ones.
But we decided to go with this one, and
we're going back to the historical sort of corner here.
Yeah, so we are dealing with ancient Chinese explorers. Mm-hmm. We had, Dylan reach out, and I'm obsessed with transoceanic contact theories.
Like pre-Columbian.
Pre-Columbian theories. Mm-hmm. And so we gravitated to this one, and so here we are. Because it's just absolutely fascinating. I personally feel that the possibilities of ancient peoples reaching, North America, crossing an ocean, is just far more fascinating, far more just crazy to think about than other types of travel and other expeditions and stuff. Like, to me, like, these stories and these legends of people crossing the ocean and, visiting,
whether intentionally or accidentally, or you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
Just the sheer idea that the capability was there. Yeah. Like, that's really cool to think. Because, like, honestly, in the conventional classroom history, lesson setting, we are just taught Columbus sailed the ocean, he landed on the shores, and that was the beginning of contact. Yeah. And there's obviously it's been proven beyond a doubt that the Vikings were there before Columbus.
Yes, they had a settlement in Newfoundland.
Exactly.
The only thing is they just didn't go that much further south than that. But yeah, it's funny, right? We know that definitively. I guess it's important to just state that right off the top, because we're talking about China reaching North America well before Columbus in this episode, but we already know that the Vikings did. Exactly. It's just important to say.
And they came from, obviously, the west. They came from the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So what we're going to be discussing is coming from the east, obviously, from China.
Yeah.
And traveling across the Pacific. So this is from the other side.
Yeah.
And this is really, really fascinating. We've come across a couple of interesting stories, fascinating characters.
Definitely.
And I'm really excited to just dive right into this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, okay. But before we actually, dive into the main dish, which I love. I love our header for our notes, but I'm going to save it. I guess what we should maybe establish, because we are going to be doing more pre-Columbian transoceanic contact episodes.
Yeah, this is kind of part one.
Yeah. Exactly, right, yeah. So today we're going to be focusing more on the Chinese side of things. Mm-hmm. In the future, we might end up doing a Norse episode. We might end up focusing on the Irish, those myths.
There's some pretty interesting stories from a lot of
And if anyone else has any cool random stories that they want to send in as suggestions, we would love to hear it, because we're all those.
Definitely.
But I guess, with ancient contact theories, there's kind of two areas of interest, or almost like two areas, two sort of periods. One is a lot more ancient, thousands and thousands, 20,000 years ago, that type of time, where they could have perhaps migrated through, some people will point to the Bering Strait as, one example.
Yep.
A lot of people, it's the topic of fierce debate, and
a
lot of people
been sort of disproven a little bit.
Exactly,
in some camps argue that, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea that obviously, the first kind of wave of people doing these sort of ancient travel, and whether or not even as far back as 20,000 years, there were nomads who could have possibly made skin boats and made their way along the ice sheet, but via the ocean, coming from the opposite direction of the Bering Strait, coming up and around. And then that was the idea of the Clovis culture kind of converging. Okay. But the point is that that's sort of the first wave.
That's
right?
Exactly. So that's not really what we're going to focus on.
No.
We are going to focus on more of the second wave, a little bit, I want to call it modern, but
more modern than 20,000 years.
It is, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is the idea that the first one we're going to start with happens to fall in the 15th century.
Yeah.
Pre-Columbian, obviously. It was about 70 years before Columbus ever set sail.
Yeah.
And, I was under China's most powerful eunuch. What's the tagline?
No balls, all glory.
And we're talking about a guy named, it's spelled Zheng He, pronounced Yung Ha.
Yung Ha.
I don't even, yeah, sorry, I'm totally butchering that.
No,
but,
I think that's actually not bad. Yongha.
but very interesting. He was actually a Muslim Chinese admiral and a eunuch. So he definitely had very humble beginnings, but he quickly became exactly that, China's most powerful admiral, and he sailed a fleet of, I don't even know, like hundreds of ships, but they made approximately, 7 voyages, not world voyages, but 7 main exploratory missions throughout his time.
Yeah.
But humble beginnings, right? So this guy...
Like his original name, he was actually born under the name Ma He or Ma Ha,
really?
to a Muslim family in sort of a landlocked area. So it was kind of, it's interesting that he excelled to end up being the leader of an ocean-faring Chinese fleet and a very powerful position in China at the time when he was basically born to a farming family in the middle of nowhere, essentially.
That's fascinating.
It's kind of crazy. But the reason we wanted to start with Yongha is that we had never heard of him before we started researching this. It's insane because his accomplishments as a mariner are outstanding.
Oh yeah.
And the Chinese treasure fleets that he was commanding during this time, around 70, the first wave of his explorations was in the 1300s. So, but then the supposed potential trip to the New World, which is what some people believe Yongha achieved, was around 70 years, like you said, before Columbus.
Okay.
But I want to talk about the treasure fleets for a little bit because this is the argument. So it's like some people believe that he could have made it to North America because of the extensive nature of these ships.
Yeah.
They were absolutely massive. And Yongha, like you said, there were 7 voyages that essentially were through the Indian Ocean, and they were coastal voyages. They weren't necessarily open ocean voyages, but they were still way further than people had gone before. They were trading with spices with India. They were going
with the Persians too.
With the Persians, they had visited the coast of Africa. There are stories from people in the Swahili coasts that they claim to have Chinese ancestry from way back when.
Not to mention the animals they brought back to China. Right?
Yeah.
The giraffe, that was a really cool story.
Yeah.
It was brought back as a gift to the emperor, and literally everyone was stunned in the court because they had never seen anything like this.
Exactly.
How the heck? Okay, that again speaks to just the vastness of these ships.
Yeah.
You're transporting a giraffe.
Yeah, let's give the numbers for these because it is absolutely insane. So 7 voyages with these ships. This was between 1405 and 1433 CE. Okay. These ships were over 400 feet long.
That's way bigger than it's about the size of a soccer field.
Right.
Kind of
something like that, I believe. 7 or more masts. Okay. The actual crew, the main deck area was as big or bigger than 70,000 square feet.
Jeez.
These were basically floating cities. And what they would have is these massive treasure ships and then a bunch of smaller ships, and I'm air quoting because these smaller ships were still bigger than Columbus's ships.
So just for reference sake, the bigger boats, the biggest ones, that would be approximately 3 times the size of Columbus's ship.
Right.
When he made it to America.
And that's a conservative estimate because there's some people arguing that these ships could have actually been much bigger. They found rudders for them kind of off the coast in the one documentary we watched. My God, I can't talk today.
Yeah.
And it was over 40 feet long, just the rudder.
Yeah. That's insane.
Very, very cool. The other cool thing about these ships that kind of lends to the idea that they could have, definitely made it across the ocean, they were way more advanced for their time. They were basically designed after bamboo. So they were inspired by looking at bamboo and how it grew together in sections. And so that's how they designed the hull of their ship. So they would have individual sections. I believe it was 13 sections inside. And so if one of them, ruptured or if there was a leak, then the others would keep the ship afloat.
Watertight bulkheads.
Bulkheads. They also had an intake in the back that would allow for the ship to raise the front end if they were coming up into a massive wave. So they could break through the wave and the ship would survive massive swells.
That's really cool.
Okay, well that's going to be super helpful on a seafaring journey, right?
Exactly, right? Yeah, that's... that just speaks to exactly that, the sophistication of all of this, right? It's really it's it's stunning, like, that we haven't really been exposed to this. Like, you know, like, we get our Western side of history. We don't really get the Eastern side.
No.
You really have to dig, and you really have to go down those rabbit holes and find this stuff.
Yeah.
But that is insane. So basically, he had an armada of, like, 300 ships.
Yeah.
And I'm just reading here, a crew of 27,000 people.
Yikes.
That's
a lot of
insane.
people. That's
And you were
crazy.
telling me that one story about how, like, in some of these boats, they would literally have pools of live fish.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
would have their own food supply
On
ready
board.
to go on board.
Yeah.
Didn't have to fish off the side or anything.
No.
So they could have extensive months of travel. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like, that's so cool.
And his exploits are really well documented in China, which is why it was so funny that, you know, we haven't, I mean, it's not really that funny. I mean, it's not surprising that we hadn't heard of him, but
Yeah.
super, super famous and well documented in China. He was a great navigator. You know, he used celestial navigation, knew what he was doing. Really interesting character.
Yeah. And so he basically was the figurehead for all these missions. Like we said, there were 7
Yeah.
official ones. And basically the idea was that China wanted to assert itself as, like, the supreme power of the seas.
Yeah.
So they wanted prestige, they wanted respect, and so they engaged in these voyages in order to establish trade partners with other, like we mentioned, with Persia, with India, and all these things, because they definitely had, and in Africa too.
Yeah.
Things like ivory, spices, exotic woods, and wildlife, like we mentioned, the giraffe.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons for them to be out and about, and it's very interesting. I remember learning in my, what was it? It was like some sort of pre-1800s economic world history.
Oh, okay.
And it was like, you know, the Niall Ferguson, the West and the rest, that type of thing. Like, why is the West in the position it is, as far as, like, you know, like, I wouldn't call it like global supremacy, but basically it kind of ended up being that way with the Industrial Revolution
Yeah.
and everything else. So why did this happen? And, like, I remember learning about, like, the closing of China, essentially, and how they had this great wave of exploratory, like, you know, like, an era of all of this, and then they essentially just shut her down, and it was all politics. It was all just a shift into exactly that, like, what they wanted to focus on, what they thought the world could offer them, and they basically were like, meh, you know
Yeah.
what, we can take our own, and that was kind of it. And then on the flip side, you get the European powers doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And there's so many fascinating reasons for that, and I remember Jared Diamond had some really cool theories on that. We won't get into all of it, obviously, or any of it right now, because it's not really relevant.
Yeah, no, not economic
But-
history right now, but
No, but it is very interesting to think that that was the main, like, it was political prestige, and then secondarily economic sort of relations, that type of thing.
well, and it's interesting too. The shutting down, you know, ended up in, you know, documents being lost, things being destroyed, a lot of that
Exactly.
kind of thing,
A
right?
lot of records,
because the new leadership. I mean, it's like a lot of things. We've seen it a lot in the Middle East, like with Arab Springs and stuff like that. It's you want to eliminate your predecessors' information and kind of accomplishments and stuff like that, right?
And I think a lot of it had to do with the idea that China, like, the imperial ruler, he kind of had this, I wouldn't call it like a, I don't even know how to really phrase it, but not an insecurity, but, like, basically he didn't want people looking outside of China. He wanted it, you know, he wanted the central authority to reside within the walls. And then that's when you get, like, that period of
Right.
the building of the Wall of China and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just very interesting to think that they thought that that was almost like undermining China's authority
I know,
over
right?
its citizens, in a
Yeah.
sense. Like, that's just one idea, obviously.
Right.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
not sure, that's not the whole story
No.
by any means. But yeah, very, very interesting.
What documents could have been lost? Like, what history could have been, you know, pushed into the corners? Like, if people did, you know, even people before Zhong Ha. That's what's fascinating.
Exactly that. But Zhong Ha, like, yeah, he definitely, people do think that he definitely had the capabilities and he could have made it to the New World. And you had that world map, hey? That was interesting.
Yeah, so that's been a very contentious thing for a while now. I think it was kind of surfaced in the late 90s or early 2000s. It's essentially a map of the world that was purchased through a Shanghai dealer, which sounds shady already, but I think it's just because the word Shanghai just sounds like
Can't say that.
you're getting
enough.
Shanghaied.
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely a contentious map because it depicts curvature. So essentially, it shows that whoever was drawing the map knew the world to be round.
Okay.
The idea is that it was a map that was originally drawn in 1418, so well before Columbus, but then it was recreated in the 16th century.
Oh.
So it was like reproduced, and that's the copy that people are looking at. So, but there's things about it that match up with the date 1418, but then there's also things that don't. So there's characters, Chinese characters, that supposedly don't match up with the era, like phraseology, basically. Also, China.
With the 1400s era?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And also, there's an argument that China is not depicted in the center of the map. Therefore, it couldn't have been a Chinese explorer that drew it.
That's such a Eurocentric view of things.
That is exactly. And of course, they do have maps with China in the middle. But at the same time, I feel like if it was an exploratory map, like it's a map of where to get, this is where this continent is, this is where this landmass is, I don't think it was necessarily being drawn for, patriotic whatever, right? It was just a map, potentially. It's just a map of
just a navigation
where
tool.
things are. Yeah. But it's really interesting because if it was from somebody linked to Zhonghua, it's compelling. It's because it looks really cool, man. Like it's like an old pirate treasure map looking
really
thing,
does.
right?
It's really neat. We'll have it up
Absolutely
on our website for everyone. But so his name actually isn't associated with this map or anything. It was just the time period.
It's the time period
Okay.
because that would have matched up with his expeditions.
Okay.
The argument is that he didn't actually, in heading towards the later stages of those expeditions, the 6th and 7th, he was kind of like, his health was kind of waning. Some people say that he actually died on the last expedition and was buried off the coast of India. Some say that he made it back to China, spent his remaining days in China and passed away there. And of course, some people say that that 7th voyage was actually around, around the world, basically, like a world trip. And that's where this map comes from. The question is whether it came before the first voyage, after the first voyage, or is this just somebody else who's attributing it to Zhonghua out of respect or out of whatever.
You mean someone coming much later, like in the 16th century?
No, I mean either at the same time. Like maybe somebody that he had mentored or something, right?
Or one of his navigators.
Exactly. Because the thing is like people's names change too. We saw that with Zhonghua. His original name was Ma He or whatever it was.
And then he gets this like admiral name kind of thing.
He ended up, and then as he rose ranks, his name ended up changing. But this idea was really popularized in a 2002 book called 1421. It's called The Year China Discovered America, and it basically argues that, the largest fleet in the world, which was this treasure fleet, set sail from China and proceeded to, make it all the way to North America, where they interacted with the indigenous peoples of North America.
I think it's totally plausible that they could have done that.
Yeah.
Like, they have that very favorable current, right? I don't even know if it's called just, like, the Chinese current or whatever, but it runs along that parallel.
Right.
That eventually meets up with the Californian coastline.
Yes.
And from there, there's actually two different currents kind of splits off. So you can go north up to Alaska, or you can go south down to New Mexico.
Right.
And apparently if you go south, at one point it gets really, really hairy. And a lot of ships have essentially been dashed on the rocks.
Right.
So if you had like a Chinese junk or whatever, like, you know, like a wooden ship of sorts, then who knows, maybe... Like, there is definitely the theories that there was massive, like, a fleet of ships that essentially that happened, where they were dashed on the rocks, and there's evidence of perhaps Chinese anchors off the coast of California. We're going to get into that.
Yes, we
will. That's one of our sweet pieces of evidence to support all this.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like, this thing, hey, man, like, so yeah, not directly associated with this map, but was the preeminent mariner / admiral / figurehead of China exploring all this stuff. So yeah,
it basically
definitely
plausible, and essentially, like, just to close up this section, if it is genuine from 1418, this map, like the recreation of it, then it would have to be from Zhonghua. It has to be, because there's nobody else that would have had the the capability, really, for that specific time period.
Very cool.
Very cool.
So I think, well, we've got a few more really cool stories that are like from more ancient times.
Yeah, we're sort of moving. We're
moving
starting
backward.
with most recent and moving backwards, which is the opposite of what we normally do.
Yeah, but it was the most plausible, right? This sort of idea of Zheng He. And then, yeah, there are these a couple other stories from Chinese classics that we're going to get into. But before we do, we're just going to take a quick promo break from just for our friends over at the Fan Film Boys. So, yeah, really cool. Like we mentioned before, we're actually going to be doing this fun series with them all about, scoundrels, megalomaniacs, and crazy people in history, which is going to be really fun. And they have a really fun show. Like, it's about film, but it's different because they actually focus on the fan films.
Yeah.
Like things like, for example, their latest episode, it was on a fan film about Lord of the Rings. It was called Hunt for Gollum.
Crazy.
And so, yeah, I feel
Very
like
cool.
Yeah, they definitely dive into the more fringy nature of film. So if you're into that, like, check them out, man. They're
Definitely.
really fun, entertaining. It's a good show.
Totally.
So, anyways.
Take a listen to this promo.
Rob, are you a Star Wars fan?
Quite a bit, yes.
Would you like to see Darth Maul take on a whole bunch of Jedi?
Wow, I don't think we ever saw that in the film. What do you mean?
Oh, there's a fan film for that.
Whoa.
Are you a fan of Lord of the Rings?
I've seen the movies.
Would you like to see what Strider was up to before the Hobbits found him?
Whoa, that sounds interesting, but don't think I've ever seen that before.
There's a fan film for that.
Nice.
Are you a fan of The Predator?
Oh, I love The Predator.
Would you like to see The Predator taking on medieval knights?
That sounds like an awesome story. Where was that?
There's a fan film for that, too.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
This is the Fan Film Boys podcast. You can check out all this stuff.
Wow. Mal, where could I find us?
You can find Fan Film Boys on www.podfixnetwork.com. And you can check out Fan Film Boys Pod. That's boys with a Z.
Boys!
On iTunes and anywhere else that you can listen to podcasts. This podcast is for fans of all different genres, fans of filmmaking, and fans of podcasts in general. Make sure that you check us out.
I can't wait.
And we're back. So, yeah, make sure you go check out those guys.
Yeah.
And now for more stories of ancient Chinese explorers. So this story actually picks up about 1,000 years before Columbus would have set sail towards America.
Yep.
So this is 458 AD, and it actually comes from the records of, I'm going to butcher this, but Lang Shu. I'm saying it how it's spelled.
It's like
I'm
all
not saying it how it would be pronounced because
Probably not.
anyways, yeah, there's always a lot of discrepancies. Lang Shu. Anyways, and he describes the tale of 5 Buddhist monks that boarded a Chinese vessel along with a few of their assistants. So it was like a skeleton crew essentially.
Right.
And apparently they traveled. It's kind of vague. It's like they traveled across the sea. The way they describe it is that they traveled east, but what's probably more likely is that they were traveling a little bit northeast, and then they ended up exactly like how we mentioned, right? Because there was that more favorable current that would have taken them essentially to the coast of California.
Right.
And so they basically, the story goes that they traveled up and down this coast. It was kind of like a triangle is how I'm picturing it. So more northernly, then down British Columbia towards California, and then back around.
Crazy.
It took them like 41 years. And there was only one monk that made it back.
Could you imagine going
Everyone
on
else
a
was gone.
41-year
Right?
voyage?
I don't know. Anyways, this is like your whole life.
Oh
so,
my gosh.
Yeah, so one monk returned to China. It's unclear what happened to the others, if they died, if they remained there voluntarily, whatever. But this one remaining monk, his name was Hui Shen, and he called this land that they had discovered Fusang, spelled Fusang.
Okay.
Yes, and it's called Fusang because of the pervasive amounts of these bushes, these plants that had what they described as red pearl berries that resembled mulberries.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he had quite the tale to tell. Apparently, he described well-organized communities of natives. He described an abundance of natural resources that they were using, including like paper that they made from this tree, this Fusang tree.
Interesting.
As well as the cultivation of like deer, that type of thing, like
Right.
domestication and that type of thing. And they would use the meat, they'd make the milk into cheese, all this stuff. He actually described how they had a written language too. So this is weird to me.
Yeah.
This is one of the main discrepancies, because if he's describing North American natives, then they didn't have a written
It was
language.
all oral tradition.
So that's kind of weird. But anyways, so he so he traveled along. Apparently they left images of Buddha along the way as they went, and they tried to sort of teach the people about the ways of Buddhism and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And very interesting. Apparently, so I don't know, like a lot of people take this story to not be very plausible because of other writings that the same author wrote, including the story called, I think it's called The Kingdom of Women or something, and it's a very out there account.
Okay.
And a lot of Chinese were actually embarrassed by it, and so they were like, this guy's kind of a weirdo. But not to totally poop on his account of Fusang, because I think it's really fascinating. And so like I said, he describes these trees. They kind of resemble bamboo in youth, but then they grow really quick, and they can use the bark to make material for clothing, for paper, all this stuff. He actually described how there was prisons, like they had a prison system. They had one in the north and one in the south, and that they actually had no war because they didn't have any weapons. Which actually, I don't know, it all seems like very like a fantasy tale to me in a certain sense.
It's like if there's elements of it where it's like, oh, did he actually see, a species of plant that was North American or whatever, right? Or is it just, or is this just a fantasy?
So it does come from the Chinese classics, and it was found, like rediscovered by European scholars in the 1700s. Particularly this guy called de Guignes. He was a French scholar.
Okay. And
his account is sort of recorded in this book called Pale Ink, 2 Ancient Records of Chinese Exploration in America. And it's by Henriette Mertz. But anyways, so she kind of describes how this French scholar, he came across this account of Fusang in 1761, and he believed that the lands described were none other than Mexico.
Wow.
So, he kind of did his own research, and he actually presented his findings or his interpretations in a paper called The Investigation of the Navigation of the Chinese to the Coast of America, and as to some tribes situated in the eastern extremity of Asia.
Okay.
And it basically was a spark point for intense debate in the Orientalist European scholar community. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people went back and forth. Essentially, his paper was unrivaled for about 70 years until this other guy came up with a very... I don't even want to mention this guy because he's such a jerk. But anyways, he was a Prussian named Klaproth.
Okay.
And he was very highly critical of this theory. He decided, in his little mind, that the Chinese were not nearly advanced enough to know the difference between South and East. That's what he concluded. And he essentially dismissed any and all Chinese innovation and ability, and he didn't even recognize that they had come up with the magnetic compass. So it's like, so these people, they have the compass first before Europeans. They don't know the difference between East and South. I think he got that a little wrong. But anyways.
I mean, we're talking about a country where the people, like, even going back to the alchemy episode, like, these people invented gunpowder. They invented, like, they knew what they were doing, man.
Yeah, they had tinfoil.
Like,
come on. But anyways, I was kind of mad about that.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Because it's such a cool... It's a really cool story, and there is a lot of, like, specificities to it that kind of lend support for its legitimacy, I would say. Mm-hmm. Just even the fact that, they were very specific. Like, they talked about how Fusang was about 20,000 Chinese miles away from the Great Han Country, as well as east from the Middle Kingdom. So, Middle Kingdom was actually China. That's how they referred to it. Yeah. So, they had, like, they had reference points, and I don't know. I feel like it's a lot to kind of just be like, oh, just made up fable kind of thing, like,
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? Like, I want it to be true, obviously,
Me too.
right? And I personally feel like there's the best evidence for all of this is yet to come, unless it's gone, like outright gone, because it's either it was destroyed in the changing hands of power in Chinese history, or it's been destroyed by nature and weather here, like evidence that was here at one time. But I think there's still probably stuff out there to find.
And the thing is, there definitely is physical evidence, and we're gonna get into that because there's that's important. That's a big part of it. But
Yeah.
we want to start off with the anecdotes, the stories, the
Yeah,
narratives,
yeah.
and then get into that because, that's just how we roll.
Absolutely. That is how we roll. There was another really interesting story, but it's not, there's no date to go with it though.
Oh, this was the really cool one.
Yeah,
I liked this.
This one's strange. So it basically goes, the story goes that there was a skillful explorer / magician is basically how he was described, but I don't want to give the impression that like magician, it's not magician in the sense that we'd think of it, right?
No,
Like kids'
not like a
birthday parties
trickster.
pulling rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah.
It's almost more akin to alchemist.
Transformer
Transformer,
things and-
yeah, totally.
yeah.
So there was this guy named Lee, and he wrote about his. What was their full name?
I feel like I might have, because I was the one that originally wrote this down. I feel like I kind of just put that in there.
No. Well, I don't think they gave like a full name for him. This
No,
was
they
from
didn't.
the In Search of
yeah.
way back, with Nimoy. So much fun.
Nimoy.
But anyway, this guy, he supposedly went out on some journeys, right? Like the emperor at the time, which of course we don't know what time period, had sent him out on a series of journeys. He basically comes back with writings about how he had visited a place full of mighty rivers and mountains. And that upon his return, he presented this report. Oh, sorry, we have the emperor. So Emperor Zai Shang.
Yeah, and that was honestly, I'm not sure about the spelling. I was going off just the pronunciation that was in the In Search of Doc. So it was
Okay.
it could be the Shang dynasty, which does make sense.
Right, and that would have been around Shang Dynasty.
That was BCE, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would have been about 3,300 years ago.
Okay.
So definitely well before. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, where am I at here? So anyway, so this guy goes out, comes back, basically describes North America, essentially. And he presents this report to the emperor about these distant lands and says to him that those who are... basically, there's an elixir of life waiting in this new world. Okay?
How convenient.
Right.
It's just on the other side of the ocean, man.
But then it immediately makes me think of alchemist. It's like, this guy's definitely an alchemist.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
He's talking about the elixir of life, and he's trying to bait the emperor into basically getting him to return to this new world. He pleads with the emperor for this. And he basically says that in order to return and obtain this elixir, he has to send exchange of noblemen and beautiful women and skilled craftsmen.
I think it was 1,000 noblemen you had to get.
1,000 noblemen. Okay.
Yeah. Very
and,
specific here.
and in response,
You know what's funny, actually?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm
Go.
totally interrupting you because I'm getting a notion in my head now. I'm thinking, this guy was a trickster. He tricked his emperor into basically sending out a ton of resources and a ton of people. And then what happens in the end, Andrew?
They never come back.
They never came back.
They never return.
Maybe they established their own colony somewhere in the New World.
Maybe.
And that is actually, that could correlate to some anecdotal evidence from North American indigenous people.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
we've come across, and very, very interesting. The Rainbow Bridge, for example, I feel like that could be the connection. If they literally had a fleet of ships, like there was a fleet, I don't know how many exactly, but there was a lot. And
Definitely.
they sent out a ton of resources.
Yeah.
So
And even before the time of Zhonghua, where with the treasure fleet, the Chinese still had, technology that was advanced enough to get them across. Like their ships were
Yeah.
really well built.
And like I mentioned, right, there is evidence of... so basically off the coast of California, I can't remember, I think it's like the I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, I don't have it in front of me, but there is about an acre or so on the ocean floor, just off the coast, off this peninsula. And scattered in this acre, there's there's dozens of these
dozens. There's
anchors,
lots.
supposedly. These massive rocks with holes drilled through them. Some of them can be natural. We definitely have seen that, but there's definitely ones that are man-made, manufactured.
Yeah.
And you can see the evidence. There's definitely a difference.
Yeah.
And there's essentially a whole slew of these in this one area, which leads me to believe that there was a massive, a fleet of ships that were wrecked. That basically were dashed on the rocks, maybe of the peninsula, that type of thing. And that Larry Pearson guy who looked into the anchors in the 80s, he kind of came to that conclusion too.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
like that, it makes sense. And what if these people that were dashed to the rocks, there were survivors that came to shore, and then they ended up intermarrying
yeah.
and just becoming part of that population?
Totally. Like if there was enough people, it was 1,000 people or more potentially, right? If we're talking sort of more of a Zhonghua type
Exactly.
expedition with ships carrying much more people. Yeah, it's plausible. It's
They
plausible.
could, and then they would have influence on the physical features of the population.
Yeah.
And there are people from the Pomo area, from that tribe, that talk about how there are essentially people there with a bit of lighter skin, a bit of almost like what they described as a slanted eye kind of thing.
Right, like slightly
But
more
just
Asiatic,
Asiatic
features.
exactly, yeah.
Totally. And we're going to get into that in our a little bit more closer to the end here, because that's part of one of the
I'm
theories.
just jumping the gun. But you know what's interesting about that story, right? That anecdote from In Search of?
Mm-hmm.
I actually found in that Pale Ink book that I just referenced before, that Henrietta Mertz book.
Right.
She describes the exact same sort of account, a very ancient account from Chinese texts dating to approximately 2250 BCE.
Wow, crazy.
And it's known as the Classic of the Eastern Mountains, and it actually refers to several sites that could correspond to geography across Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, into Canada.
Wow.
And it's about, they describe, I think it was about 12 different mountains. For example, like the Sun Mountain, the Mountain of the Creeping Plants, under which supposedly lies gold and gems and all this kind of interesting stuff. So lots of natural resources and things.
Right.
And it actually, it looks as though, like, people have done a lot of research into this and they've kind of mapped it out. And it describes a chain of mountains that run through Colorado, exactly like I said, Wyoming, Montana, Saskatchewan, then Manitoba.
Like the Rockies?
The most significant peaks.
Crazy.
Exactly. It's not a... Is it the...
Would it be the Colorado Rockies and then moving up north? I don't know. I don't know enough
I
geography.
can't remember. It's like the Cordillera Range or something.
Okay.
If anyone knows
That's
more.
so crazy though, because it's like, it's little small details like that, and then people have kind of remapped it out, and that's what it matches up with. That's
And
wild.
That's crazy, because that's like really far into the continent, right? Like that's not just coastal.
No, and that was the story with the monks too, right? Like the earlier one, that they just trekked inland, like they just frickin' started walking and they made it all the way to the Grand Canyon, basically.
Supposedly, yeah.
That immediately reminds me of the Kincaid's Cave episode of Astonishing Legends, where supposedly there was, some statues and caverns and things discovered, that there was Buddhist markings and Buddhist statues and different things like that. Eastern things.
Well, there you go.
Of course, that would have been more ancient though than the monks.
Than the one account from
journey.
the monks, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that was funny, I just wanted to mention about that, when in the documentary, where it was like that they traveled 20,000 leagues, which was just funny because we just watched 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and for the longest time I always thought leagues was depth, but it's just distant. But it's distance.
Oh yeah.
Right. So it's like
vertical or horizontal.
So anyway, it's funny. Don't yawn.
Sorry, just scratching.
No, it's all good. So anyway, so that's really interesting though, that you found that in the Pale Ink.
I know, I thought that was really cool. And honestly, like, I only had access to the Google preview, so I couldn't get the full scoop, but that would definitely be one that I would love to just pick up from the local library.
Totally.
And just kind of dive into.
Totally. So we're kind of slowly migrating, pun intended, I suppose, into our sort of evidence section. Like, evidence and theory sections kind of blended together for us for this one, right?
Exactly. I feel like we've kind of covered, honestly, like, the anecdotes or the theories in a sense, because it's like, it sets the basis, the premise of when they could have been, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, we're like physical evidence now. Like, let's dive into that a little bit, because we've alluded to it. We've talked about, mentioned the anchors and this kind of stuff, but there's definitely more than that. Way more.
Definitely. I mean, and a lot of it is, and it's all debatable.
Yeah.
So, but I want
very debatable.
Very debatable. So, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the Shang dynasty, because this was a dynasty in China, 1200 BCE.
Can I just?
What?
It's dynasties.
It's dynasties.
That's an Always Sunny reference. Shady nasties.
Oh dear. Our inside jokes are just the worst. But yeah, no, the Shang dynasty, so around 1200 BCE, people argue that they influenced the Mayan and Aztec civilizations. So that they were basically, that they had made it to the coast, And this would match up with potentially with the magician account.
There you go.
So, and I guess that would be, so around 1200 BCE. So that makes sense. So well before Zhongha.
Well before.
But anyway, the argument is essentially that there is evidence of Asian influence in Mesoamerican stuff, basically. They're jade ornaments, they're tools. There's these blades made out of jade called celts that are distinctly from the Shang era. Like they are, it's the material and it's the same style that they would have used. The question I have is, like, even if there was this contact, is that just from trade, or is that from actual people staying there and then teaching people how to use materials? Of course, Mesoamerican scholars, most of them reject this. This is coming out of different camps, right? Because they're focused on their localized history and right, and they don't want to admit that it could have potentially been influenced by Chinese explorers, like, quite frankly, right?
Exactly.
The same way that, European scholars don't want to really consider evidence of any pre-Columbian transoceanic contact because it would just mess with the history
There's academic
books.
Stuffiness going on, perhaps. And, like, it's easy to draw correlations where perhaps correlations are just coincidences. There was definitely evidence of, so basically the Olmec, that's the oldest Central American civilization. Then it goes into the Maya and
Aztec.
And I came across evidence too, like, of going back to, like, the jade and everything. Like, there was, like, jade burial masks found,
right?
And they were in the exact style and everything of the Chinese,
right?
And same with, like, some of the they also alluded to the style of the calendar. And, like, the Mayan calendar, that's circular. And then also various, like, stone statues and things like that had, like, dragons' faces and all sorts of, like, things that were very Oriental influenced, seemingly.
Definitely. And that's where the thing with the Olmec gets a little strange, because a lot of people argue that, for example, the Olmec basalt heads, these giant basalt heads that they're famous for, are distinctly African. Like, they have very distinct African features. But then there's other carvings that are a little bit more Asian looking. But the thing that I find interesting about that in relation to Chinese explorers is that we know that Chinese explorers were all over the coast of Africa. If early Africans, they were seafaring peoples too, but if the Chinese were already interacting, trading, doing stuff on the coast of Africa, maybe they had a hand in exploration. Maybe they had a hand in sending a prince from, right? You know what I mean? Like, helping some other, facilitating some contacts, some trade potentially, and that could account for the African features in Olmec stuff. So it's still related to the Chinese potentially. I don't know.
It's just ancient diplomacy, man. Who knows what's going on?
Totally.
How intricate the relations were, and who knew who.
Yeah, and like you said, like, other similarities, like, with just how stuff looked. So, like, the Olmec had carvings of serpents that were very similar to resembling dragons, like in Chinese dragons, art. Also, some of the characters, the actual characters of writing, basically, on some of these jade pieces and stuff, supposedly from some Asian scholars were, like, this one guy, I actually have... We'll post everything. I've lost the name, but he said he's taking a look at these things, and right away, clearly these are Chinese characters. He's asserted that I can read this clearly. This is clearly Chinese. This is clearly Asian.
I came across, very similar. This guy, John Ruskamp, he basically, he was saying the exact same thing. It wasn't on actual jade, like the blades or anything, but it was on rocks in America.
Right.
In the area of New Mexico, California, and Arizona. And he claims that these pictograms are, exactly, from the ancient Chinese dynasty of the Shang. So, again, this, definitely correlates. And he basically says that these symbols prove, obviously, that the Chinese were exploring North America long before Europeans. And the symbols themselves, actually, he interpreted them, and he says that they give details of journeys that honor the Shang king.
Wow, okay.
And he actually claims to have identified 84 pictograms which match unique ancient Chinese sites in various locations. So, apparently these actually describe, like, sacrificial offerings and things.
Wow.
Which is very interesting. So this is it here. So it's basically one of these sets of pictograms was describing the sacrifice of a dog. And this is kind of important because dog sacrifices were very popular in this period, in the Shang Dynasty period, and the Zhou Dynasty, which followed after. But again, yeah, so it definitely conforms with the syntax and with just the general culture and the general modus operandi of like ritual practice and that type of thing. So yeah, I thought that was really, really cool. Who knows, man? Like, who knows?
Totally.
I think that it's kind of silly to ignore all this influence.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, like there was coins found on the beach in British Columbia that were Chinese, and
that's another one.
When you just mentioned the calendar, that's what it reminded me of, that because the guy that found it, I mean, this has happened multiple times, but in the one case, the guy found it and he's like, I'm looking at a Mayan calendar on a coin because that's what it looked like. But then when he had it, we brought it into the Anthropology Museum in Vancouver, and of course, it ends up being Chinese. The question is, I mean, context is everything, right? Like, even though the coins date to a certain period, it may have been brought there much later. Yeah. It's different when you find pieces that are in, say, a burial mound or that haven't been discovered. So when you're trying to make connections with, like, say, the Olmec or other Mesoamerican civilizations, for example, I feel like that stuff has a lot more credence to it, even though it's subjective interpretation a lot of the time, rather than actually physically finding something like a coin. I think the anchors and ship wreckages and all those things are a little bit more substantial. But it's still really interesting that these coins are there. They're on the coast of British Columbia. Are there.
The jade is there. The inscriptions are there. It's very interesting. Did you want to get into the Chinese anchors then, or? I
mean, well, we kind of already did a little bit.
But the thing is, so there's definitely some stuff that we didn't cover on that. So, like the skeptical approach to this, because there is the idea that, yes, on the one hand, this technology, this type of anchor, was used by the ancient Chinese mariners, but there are other alternatives. So. And just conflicting evidence. I don't know. So essentially, some people believe that these are ancient. Some people have done testing on a few of these anchors and determined that they are from the Chinese coast.
Yeah.
There has been other people in the community that claim that these are actually like local rock. So that the discrepancy for me comes from, like, are these people examining different anchors?
Right.
and to me, it's not conclusive either way, right? Because even if you do get anchors that are made from local rock, are you testing every single one of these? Because if you aren't, then you're not conclusively proving either way.
No.
So again, like I mentioned, it was about an acre of off the coast here of California where these stones were found in 1974. And that's Larry Pearson guy. He was one of the main researchers in this, and he came to the conclusion that he believes they were ancient, and that he believes that that it was the result of a fleet of ships that were essentially shipwrecked.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Because the wood is no longer there, because this was potentially 1200 BC or whatever, whenever this voyage happened. It could have been Zheng He still, and that would have been a long, technical term, a long ass time ago. Like, so, yeah.
But on the flip side, though, that's just one interpretation, because again, you do get the idea that some people believe these are much more modern, that they could have been crafted in the early 1900s by Chinese fishermen or Portuguese whalers. So there's a lot of options here, and then still others believe like these are just naturally occurring, and that is the case with a lot of them. You can get things like
sea urchins like burrow, like they make holes and stuff.
Yeah,
that was one explanation, but it's like, but
the idea that there is organic material that forms the nucleus of a rock that eventually erodes away and leaves a hole, like something like whalebone was the one suggestion from a fellow,
right?
But I don't know. There was this guy, though, James R. Moriarty, and in 1981, he tested some of these stones, and he did find that they originated from a Chinese quarry, which is kind of fascinating. And I'm not going to, this was from an LA Times article here, and this was a quote from Moriarty. He says here that... Actually, no, sorry, this isn't from Moriarty. This is from Pearson. He said that basically between 1500 and 3000 BC, the Chinese were using stones as anchors in their trans-Pacific voyages to the New World. So this guy believes that they were making multiple voyages. So,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
if they found a route and they found the right currents
That's
to do
just
it,
yeah,
right?
and there are people that suggest, they will support that and say, like, even this, Dr. Peter Niller, for example, he says that definitely ocean currents could have been used thousands of years earlier to traverse the same coastlines, the monks, Fusang, that type of thing, and then even more ancient, right, into the
Nomads and stuff.
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I really wanted to talk about the bridge, the Rainbow Bridge.
Oh yeah.
Can we get to that?
We haven't really.
I mean, we're
dived
coming
into
down
that,
to it. I mean, we I guess we can. There's this section here on the Cherokee, which is kind of interesting too, but it doesn't really necessarily match up.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of. So we'll probably end up talking about this in another one of the parts for this series for Contact.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an interesting point made about the Cherokee people and how they possibly have a Hebrew ancestry from the lost tribes of Israel. So this just goes to show how many different ideas there are out there that ancient peoples had crossed over, and that there's potentially like genetic lineage.
Cool.
And that's what kind of leads into this next story, right?
The Rainbow Bridge
The
story.
Rainbow Bridge story. You've got a good handle on that. Do you want to?
Well, yeah, we first came across this one in the In Search of documentary. And again, this comes from Larry Pearson's research, where he went to see a researcher at the Humboldt University who was this was his words, not mine, the American Indian Center.
Yeah.
So Bobby Lake was his name. And he was an expert that told the story of the indigenous Pomo of California and their mythology of the giant bridge, the Rainbow Bridge that connects their mainland to a far-off distant land in the east.
Right.
And, or no, in the west. In the east or the west? I don't even know.
Heading east from the west. Like
heading-
across the Pacific.
Heading east? You'd be heading west, wouldn't you?
They would be like, no, they if you're
The Chinese would be heading
yes.
east, and they would be heading west if they're looking.
Right,
Okay,
right,
sorry.
yeah.
Sorry. It's just a matter of your
the Earth is
perspective.
round.
Wow, fascinating. So yeah, this is really interesting. The Pitt River Indians and the Pomo. Oh my gosh. Sorry,
This is
from
direct quotes from the
In
thing.
Search of
Yeah.
documentary. I feel really bad.
It's okay.
saying
It's the
that.
1960s people, so they were referring to the indigenous peoples as
Exactly.
the Pomo Indians, which is obviously not politically
So
correct.
no,
But anyway.
so the Pitt River and the Pomo indigenous people, they have this mythology where essentially there were a race of people that arrived on the shores, and they described them as very similar to their features, but that they had a lighter, more yellowish skin with a little bit more of a what was described as a slanted eye.
Right.
And okay, so essentially I don't even know, like the story's kind of vague. Like, they stayed for a bit and then they left, and they when they left they said there was some flooding going on, which kind of reminds me of like the Noah's Ark kind of thing.
almost like a
maybe it was
great
in
flood
the
story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this could be like tens of thousands of years ago potentially. But anyways, so they basically had this sort of I don't even know what to call it, like a metaphorical bridge that connected the two societies, the two communities.
Yeah.
And there was actually spiritual leaders that would go to the tops of mountains and claim that they were having sort of like a communion, some sort of connection, that type of thing. And
Okay.
yeah, so it was a very, I think, yeah, exactly. It's a metaphor for a bridge connecting people. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they're always connected, whatever. But,
So is the idea essentially that this could have been from a fleet that was also kind of dashed on the rocks or something, or
it's very
that
vague, though, because how the hell would they have gotten home?
Yeah, well, they would have had to like build new ships and navigate their way back or something, but that would have been pretty difficult. But it is fascinating because in these people's mythology, they have ancestry, they have Asiatic ancestry. It's essentially what they claim, that they feel that they look similar to ancient Chinese, that they have skin colors that are different than their sort of very, very close neighboring indigenous populations. And the fact that that's like deep embedded into their mythology is there's something there, because it's all oral tradition, right? For the most part, other than pictograms and things like that. So that's embedded deep. Something had to have started that.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And they're even in the documentary, they did have this one tribe member. Her name was Florence Shaughnessy, And she kind of had that exact theory that, essentially intermarrying and interbreeding. I don't know, is that the word to use? I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, she said that basically, her idea was that there was a fleet of Chinese ships that had been dashed upon the jagged rocks of the Oregon coastlines a little bit further
Very
north.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Interesting.
I think that she's got something to it, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Well, what are your ultimate thoughts here? Like, I mean, obviously we're going to have a million other theories as we push forward with this series.
yeah.
But specifically for Chinese explorers, I mean, where are you at with this?
I think there could have been. Sorry. Quick yawn. I think there could have been a couple different periods in which there was contact.
Yeah.
I'm not subscribing to one in particular, but I think that it's very plausible, and I think that it's silly to dismiss any and all of these accounts because of maybe lack of physical evidence to accompany the anecdotal whatever, but then you do get remnants, you do get pieces, right? And people put it together, and I don't want to say like, yeah, you can paint it a million different ways, but in the end, like I really do believe that it's a possibility.
Yeah. No, I definitely do too. And I think one of the arguments like against a lot of these theories in general, not just for Chinese explorers, is that, where's all the physical evidence, right? So it's all sort of different interpretations of physical evidence, but where's like the hard physical evidence? So it's like we have the anchors, potentially hard physical evidence. We have some inscriptions on rocks and stuff like that, and then we have supposed accounts of journeys and things like that too.
Exactly.
But the point I'm trying to make is that if the Chinese made it over and they were interacting with indigenous peoples, those peoples don't have written language. So the one account of them writing stuff down, that's a little bit up in the air for me. But it makes sense that there wouldn't be a ton of physical evidence then. People aren't writing about these new peoples coming to visit them. There may be some pictograms or drawings that we find eventually.
Yeah.
But if the Chinese are very secretive about what they do, and later on there's a shutting off of China, they're the only ones who would have records of interacting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And if it was just trade and not settlement, other than potentially a fleet dashed on the rocks and intermingling, then there's not going to be any physical evidence of like Chinese establishments, like buildings and structures and things like that. It was just contact and trade. So absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Yeah.
So you can't just say where's the right, because there's so much anecdotal and other evidence, other types of evidence.
Exactly.
So I believe that I think that it's going to be fun to move forward here with other theories, because I think these Chinese ones, a lot of them are quite compelling. I mean, the treasure fleets of Zhongha, like just the technology that they had. It's insane.
It's again, like, just to reiterate what we said just off the top of this episode, like, it's kind of amazing to think that it's not so mainstream, like, these ideas
really.
and just the history of it, right, from the Chinese perspective, like,
even just on pure size of the ships alone, going back to Zhongha, like way bigger than the Columbus
way more
fleets.
impressive, man.
So it's like they made it across the ocean, bad weather, whatever. Why is it that 70 years prior, ships that were 3 times the size or more and were traveling with hundreds of ships, so even if you lose some ships,
exactly,
something's going to make it across, right?
Yeah.
Something. There's 27,000 crew on one. Like
no, like in the entire fleet, in the Armada.
Yeah, in the Armada. Yeah. Somebody's going to make it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Whether by accident or on purpose, like somebody's going to make it.
Totally.
So anyway, that's that basically wraps up this episode, and
that's the scoop there, folks.
That's the scoop on ancient Chinese explorers.
We want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think of Zhongha? What do you think of his potential world map?
Yeah.
I mean, is that...
Do you subscribe to the more recent sort of ideas on the possibility that these people could have... Or do you think it's more plausible, the more ancient examples and things like that?
Yeah.
There's so many possibilities, and reach out to us. Like, get on, like, our Facebook forum group is amazing. Like, we've got a lot of really active members, which is cool.
Yeah, it's dope.
As well, like, DM us if you don't want to, like, if you're...
Yeah, you can always send us a message on Instagram or Twitter. At Into the Portal 1, at Into the Portal Podcast on Instagram. We love getting emails. We've been getting some more emails lately from people, which is really awesome. So, Into the Portal mailbox at gmail.com. You can send us anything that's on your mind.
Yeah.
And if you have a particular Pre-Columbian theory that you subscribe to that you really, really like and maybe want that to be the next one in the series, let us know.
Please, yes, because, we are totally into listener suggestions. We want to make this as fun as possible for all you guys. And honestly, it makes it more fun for us when we get that input, right?
Definitely. So much more fun.
All right, we're on the right track.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do this.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, this is just great. I love it.
Yeah.
So...
Any final thoughts?
that was my conclusions.
Yeah.
I feel like my wee bit of hungover brain is about to just kind of...
Yeah, mine's about to explode too. So thanks for bearing with us, folks, on this hungover recording today.
Sorry, there's a little bit of...
a little bit of word garble. Anyway, so thank you so much for listening, and until next week on Into the Portal.
Mm-hmm.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.